Good morning, Little Rock. Welcome to another episode of the BlockTalk podcast. I'm Jamie Taylor, and I'm here with another guest named Jamie Ward from Curricula Concepts. I'm thankful that you're here. So please tell our listeners your name and kind of where you came from as far as area of Arkansas or where you're from and what you're up to.
Sure. Thanks for having me this morning.
Of course.
I'm Jamie Ward, like you said. I live in Greenbrier, but have worked in all over the state really for many, many years now. So my focus is on early childhood education, working with young children, so birth to 5, and their families, and the educators who care for them every day. I've been in this line of work, I guess you'd say, this field of work for over 20 years, probably 25 to 26 years now, and have served literally in every role you could think of. So I've been a teacher, a director, I've driven the bus, I've cooked the food, I've worked at the state level.
Seen it from every angle.
I've seen it from every angle, yes. And now really get to do all the things I'm super passionate about with Curricula Concepts. So I get to do things around family engagement, health and wellness, language and literacy, brain development, all the things that are really important to me. And to our field, too.
Yeah. Well, and I'm a little biased because being currently pregnant and knowing that I'm about to experience what a parent goes through that birth to 5 years, and things are so different now than they were years before. And I know that probably technology and time just changes everything with relation to all this. But now we have a lot more information about what happens with kids based on that first 5 years, right?
Yes. So the science on brain development has come a long way in the last 10, 15, 20 years. We know a lot more now about what's happening in the developing brain from really prenatal. Is really when it starts. Yes. Right now.
Notice I'm not drinking coffee.
I see that. Yeah. That's good. You need to be hydrated. That's good. But we know the first 3 years of life are the most important when it comes to brain development. That's when the foundation's being laid. It's just like laying the foundation of a house or building a house, right? That foundation happens those first 3 years, and then all the pathways to language and literacy and all those things are starting to play out, and then it just grows over time, right?
Isn't it true that you can learn so much more in the first 3 years than you can learn like piled up for the next 20 or some sort of crazy statistic like that?
Well, there's certainly windows of opportunity. So, learning can happen anytime, right? I mean, we still learn new things every day.
Yeah.
But there are points in our life when those windows of opportunity are open and it's sort of prime time for learning new things. So, language development, really, the pathways for language development are laid those first 3 years of life. That's why we want parents to be, and caregivers to be singing and talking and reading and doing all those things.
You don't want me singing,
those first,
but the rest of it, yeah.
Right? Yeah. Maybe. Yeah. I don't know. They don't care, though, right? Your baby doesn't care.
Yeah,
that's the beautiful thing.
Maybe. I actually called a friend on the way here, was laughing about how I was like singing this morning to the baby, and the cat got up out of the bedroom and ran out the door. And I was
that's not a good sign.
This is not a good sign.
No,
but that's okay.
No.
But it's good because so that's the right thing to do. You're reading to them. You're trying to
absolutely
talk to them, even though you're not really sure what they're doing
in
there.
Yeah. That you want them to hear as many words as they can hear during those first 3 years up to age 5, whatever it is, right? By the time they get to kindergarten, they should have heard thousands of words up to that point. And I should say they should have heard them and experienced them through interaction with other people.
Right.
So passive learning through a screen is not the same.
That was one of my major questions for you too, isn't there like what's the rule on that? I mean, if you're talking about putting a kid in front of a screen, talking about what you're trying to develop in them in that first 3 years, is screen time a bad thing? Or is there limited screen time for certain ages? Or
yeah, so really you should not put a screen in front of a child before they're 2. That's just that we just know how the brain works, and the brain works. We say baby plus 1, right? Everything the baby learns in those first 2 years, there has to be a safe, nurturing caregiver experiencing that, providing that, language and learning. It just does not happen passively.
Right.
So if you if you do use screens, because we know, hey, it's a part of the day's world, right?
Right.
But the only way I would recommend using it is if it's used interactively with an
Right.
adult. So maybe you're FaceTiming
Yeah.
a family member who's across the country or whatever, using it that way
Right.
would be fine. But other than that, I would
Yeah.
stay away from it. Now, I also know families are busy and sometimes they're like, just for this 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, I have to have 10 minutes to go get something done.
Yep.
Is that going to be a huge detriment? Maybe not.
Right, but it shouldn't be their full-time
Right.
communication. Well, and then that's the thing. So how do you guys figure all of this out? I mean, tell me about Curricula Concepts and how it's built to where you take this information and you facilitate the growth of families through educators and through the families themselves. I mean, how would this work if I reach out to you and I say, Jamie, I'm about to have a baby. I'm not really sure what to do. I don't know what childcare center to put them in. I don't know what to do with the screen time, all those things, nutrition. I mean, how does that all work?
So there's a lot of really good resources in Arkansas. Arkansas is actually known nationally for our work in pre-K, so 3 to 5. So many years ago, the state obligated millions of dollars for a state-funded pre-K program. So there's about 22-ish, maybe, don't quote me on that, 1,000 children. It's between 20 and 24,000 children, I'd say, across the state, 3 to 4 years old, receiving pre-K services in
That's
school
awesome.
districts, in private programs, whatever it might be, at no cost to the family. And
That's
that's of
nice.
course based on income levels and other things. So we're doing really well in pre-K. Infants and toddlers, the infant and toddler care is where we have a lot of work to do on what we're providing. So I'm sorry, I just totally blanked on your question, so I'm coming back to it.
Yeah, no.
So what we do is we work, Curricula Concepts, me and my staff work with childcare providers, mostly childcare providers, to engage families. So we really now, just from presenting at conferences and just because I've been in this work for so long and my staff have too, we just know people and they sort of know that we're a resource to them. So they'll reach out to us or we'll reach out to them and offer professional development and training. We're constantly writing new things based on research as it comes out around how to engage families, what's important to families. I mean, we do a lot of work with families around building social connections because we know how important it is to be socially connected. I mean, the opposite of that's being isolated.
Right.
And as a parent, that's not
Dangerous.
a good place to be.
It's dangerous.
Yeah.
I can tell you from experience. So
it really is.
And that's one of the things is when you talk about community engagement, family engagement. So what you're doing is giving an opportunity to families to have this resource, but also to find within their own community people that they can lean on and talk to and
Absolutely.
sort of create a community around to raise these kids.
Yeah, so we'll bring them in. One model that we use, it's a cafe model. So there's lots of different cafes. There's policy cafes and all sorts of cafes. But we use this model where we go into a child care facility that may be in a school district or it may be a private program. And the beauty of this model is it's not just parents, or I hate even use the term parents anymore because we have
Caregivers.
family members, I mean, aunts, uncles, grandparents, great-grandparents caring for kids, right? And so it's, I would dare say, never just parents in a room.
Right.
It's a family member or a caregiver. But we do these cafes with staff from the child care program and families. So not only is it giving the opportunity for staff and families to build connections together, because a lot of times it's just pick up and drop off, right?
Right.
Here's my kid, have a great day, I'm back to get them. And that's it.
Yep.
And if
There's not a lot of interaction there. Yeah.
And if you don't have that positive relationship built between those two people, it makes it really challenging if you had to have a difficult conversation about anything, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just human interaction.
Well, and it seems kind of crazy because you're talking about people that are taking care of your kids all day long. And it's funny because right now, I mean, with one of my children, he's in 6th grade. So I'm seriously like in touch with his teacher all the time. Like,
Right.
did you see
Yeah.
him do this? You know, but it's easier because he can talk and do things,
Yeah.
as a baby, there's no advocate for them. And under 5 years old, there's really no advocate besides the educator and the caregiver.
Right.
Right. So you're connecting them and giving them resources. And
Yeah.
when you say that, you're also giving educational resources to the provider, right?
Yes. Absolutely. So we do a lot of training specifically for the early educator. So right now we're really focused on just the piece of why is it important to engage families and to sort of be that hub for them to get the resources that they need, right? They're there every day. Their child's there every day. So what can you do? And sometimes it's so far off their radar because they're literally just trying to make sure they have enough staff in the classroom, make sure, that things are rolling like they need to be, that they're just not thinking, oh, what can I do to better support my families, right?
Right.
So we try to give them some tips and ideas for things to do, like do you have a little coffee pot you can set up, and when they're coming in and out, they could stop and grab a cup of coffee and chat with another parent real quick and figure out that so-and-so's going through the same thing I'm going through. Oh my gosh, I felt so alone. I had no idea. I mean, we hear that literally every time we work with families.
I mean, if you think about it, kids with dietary restrictions would need other parents to talk to about how to deal with the allergy thing. And if you're dealing with a bedwetting situation and you can't get past that, and you maybe need another parent to give you insight on what they did. My mind's kind of working around all of this now and thinking, what a great idea. So if you're a parent, or if you're a daycare provider or early pre-K provider, basically anyone that's dealing with children from birth to 5 years can reach out and find out what Curricula Concepts and you specifically can do for them. Yeah.
We're doing a lot right now around health and wellness. So there's one of my staff is a certified yoga instructor, and so we're doing yoga in the classroom sessions. She and I were both certified last year on trauma-informed yoga. So
what's that?
So that is thinking about children who've experienced trauma in any form.
Right.
And so we go in and we teach. Right now, we've written a 2-hour session for educators on this. And this is what's really getting into some of the early elementary grades. We've had some interest from some principals to come in and do this session with them because our certification is for age 3 to 18 years for children. But so we go in and talk about trauma, like what is trauma? What's it look like? There's all sorts of stresses, and they all have different impact, right, on our developing brain. So there's positive stress. So like you're getting ready to come on a podcast for the first time, and you're a little bit anxious, right? That's okay, right? Yeah. That's a positive stress. We want to have those feelings,
right? And get past them, work through them, figure it out, right?
But there's also on the opposite end of that spectrum, there's toxic stress. And a lot of our babies experience that level of stress, whether it be physical abuse, neglect, abandonment, whatever it is. And so toxic stress is really when you have those experiences and you don't have a nurturing, safe caregiver to help buffer those things.
Right.
And so what we're talking to educators about is how do you, first of all, what is trauma? What's it look like? How does it manifest in behavior, right? And then what are some strategies you can use to work with those kiddos? So we talk about mindfulness and breathing strategies, simple yoga poses and things like that. And what we know is those are good for any child.
Yeah.
Right.
And especially when you're forming, like you're talking about, this is during the most formative years. And I think that people sometimes experience trauma at an age or a level that you can't wrap your head around that, especially when you're 2 or 3 years old. You can't wrap your head around abuse, right? So if you have some way to figure out how to handle it, or at least, like you said, handle the manifestation of that stress, then that's going to equip you for a lifetime to be able to deal with that. That's an incredible asset to educators and parents and children and caregivers.
Yeah, we have. It's funny when you talk just to adults in general, not just early educators, but and remind people that sometimes we ask things of 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and 5-year-olds that we can't do ourselves.
No. When you were saying this, I was like, I wonder if I could sit still for 5 minutes.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. I tried practicing meditation. It took me 2 years to get through the first one.
Or to wait in line. Right? I mean, how many adults have you seen in line at Walmart that were not irritated and agitated and distracted? And
thanks a lot, Amazon.
All those things, right? But yet we're asking kids every day to walk in a straight line and not touch anybody and hold a bubble in their mouth and, or sit in a lunchroom and not talk to their friends. How many times have you gone out to eat with friends and sat in silence.
No, and that's
Right.
I actually did think that one time when my son was like, "Well,
Yeah.
we're not allowed to do that at
Yeah.
school." During lunch, I was like, "What? Like,
Yeah.
they should send you out in a field and just let you run."
Right. Now I do think you have to, there should be rules, right?
sure.
And you have to keep the volume down and all those things. But that's just something I can't wrap my head around that.
Yeah. Well, so what get you, because I know how you we talked a little bit before the show about how you got into it, but as far as what you're passionate about, that was one of the things you mentioned, that you really get to focus on the things you're passionate about. What are those things that you would say are the things that bring you the most joy in your endeavor to create this opportunity for families?
Yeah. So a couple of things have happened over the last few years, 2 or 3 years, I'd say, that have allowed sort of my personal passion and my work life to collide, which has been really nice. One is just my work with families. I mean, I could tell you story after story after story about these things that events that we have with families and the things that they say, like, "Oh my goodness, like I feel like I've just been in therapy for an hour," and really we're just letting them talk.
Yeah.
We're just facilitating conversation
Right.
around intentional topics, but we're just really giving them the space to talk. That's been one thing that's been super powerful. And then the other piece of the work that has me really excited is the stuff we're doing around health and wellness. So we are working, we have a 3-year project that's just starting right now. Right now we're working in Pulaski County and Jefferson County, and we're recruiting childcare programs or school districts that have pre-K and younger to participate in these learning collaboratives where they'll come together 4 or 5 times in a year, and they'll learn about physical activity, about nutrition, screen time, breastfeeding support, and infant feeding. And then in between each of those sessions, they're going to get technical assistance. So one of my staff are going to go out to their facility, think about their practice and policy that they have now in each of those content areas, and then develop an action plan for making things better.
Yeah,
right?
move it to the next level, find another way to...
Yeah, a different way to do it. So we did a similar project a couple of years ago in Faulkner County and Mississippi County, and the changes that were made in those programs, I mean, some of the things you're like, what? They weren't already doing that?
Yeah.
No, they weren't. I mean, it's just because we do what we know, right? Until we learn something better.
Well, and you mentioned when you come in and talk about even having a coffee pot and people to meet, like what you mentioned about people dropping kids off and picking them up, that's essentially what happens at a lot of schools and a lot of early pre-K, all of that. That's what you're doing. You're dropping off, picking up as part of your day.
Yes.
And then you talk about facilitating conversations where people actually get to sit down and say the things they're thinking about. Well, of course, that's going to be life-changing.
Yes.
Because they're just dropping off and picking up, and they never get to tell you when they get the kid home, this is what happened.
Yes.
And as a result of their experience in the program, when it changes, I'm sure they then go home and have a better positive family experience.
Absolutely.
And yeah.
Yeah. So I had at a program in, I won't say where it was, but I had a participant. This has been a couple years ago, and she was a grandmother, and she was caring for her little granddaughter. And so she came to this conversation that we were having, and I can't even remember what the topic was at the time, but we always open with, a real simple introduction, like we're just trying to break down the walls, right? So we don't say like, what are your main goals in life?
Yeah.
Anything like it's literally like,
I hope you brought a checklist.
Yeah, it's like, tell us your name and your favorite thing to do, or
Right.
just something super simple. So we do that, and then we move into a little partner activity, again, just trying to break down the walls a little bit. So this particular activity, they were given a blank piece of paper, markers, whatever, and we just said, draw something that reflects a feeling that you've had over the last 2 weeks. Can be positive, can be negative, can be whatever you want. No words, just draw the picture. And then the partner activity was the partner had to try to guess what the feeling was. So I'm walking around, and this grandmother had picked up just a gray marker and just drew a box on her piece of paper. And so I said to her, I'm going to need to know more about that.
Yeah.
Like, I want to know more about that, But I didn't have a relationship with her yet. This was my first time in their program, so I wasn't going to ask her to share unless she felt comfortable to do so. And so we moved on, and a couple of people wanted to share because it was so fun, what they had felt over the last week or two, whatever. Anyway, finally, towards the end, she sort of raised her hand and said, okay, I want to tell you what this means. And I was like, okay, what's it mean? Yeah. And she said, This represents a box, an empty box, and this is how I feel. I feel so empty and so alone, and I don't know what I'm doing. And I mean, just kept on and
Lost.
on and on. And she was like, just being here tonight, surrounded by other people who are experiencing the same things that I'm experiencing, which are really everyday things. I mean,
Yeah.
it was nothing abnormal, but when you feel isolated and you're not socially connected, that completely overwhelms you and then has an impact on your child, right? And
You can't pour from an empty cup.
Right. So that I said to her, I said, can I please keep your piece of paper? Like, I just need to keep that just as a reminder of why we do this work.
Yeah.
And why it's so important. And of course, she said yes, and I still have it to this day.
Yeah.
'Cause
And what
it
an
is-
incredible example of what you're doing, because you're bringing communities together, one parent and family and developer and
Yeah.
educator at a time,
Yeah.
because that's what they really need.
It is.
And people always talk about how it takes an entire community to raise a kid. And you're right, because it's like most of their time is spent with their educators, right?
Yeah.
It's not even spent. Like my kid
Yeah.
spends more time at school than he does with me awake.
I think we did some math one time, and it's like if a child goes into care at 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, until they go to kindergarten, they spend like 11,500 hours in care with
That's a lot
someone
of time.
other than their parent.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's crazy to think about not having a close relationship with that person. Like when you throw it at me like that, it's like, oh, this needs to be my best friend / my mom, cousin, sister, uncle, like somebody that's really close
Yeah.
to me. But these people are, they're just trying also to make a living, and this is their job, and they have to.
That's another part of my work. So I do a lot of work, like systems level work, and so over the last 10 months or so, I've been working with a group. There's 4 of us sort of lead partners, and then we've got a collaborative of about 70 people who've been looking at policy and practice just within the state around educational things, health, mental health, home visiting services. We do have great home visiting programs in Arkansas. So we've looked at, like, what are we providing as a state and where could we improve? And we actually got to present at the first Early Childhood Wellbeing Legislative Caucus in January
Nice.
about some of what our findings are. But part of that work was looking at our early childhood workforce. And I worked with UAMS a couple years ago to do 2 workforce studies. So we studied. We had one study where directors answered all the questions, responded to all the questions, and then another where staff answered questions. And so, the data tells us everything we already know, but
Confirms.
but to have it on paper and to be able to share it with policymakers and people who can make changes is really helpful.
Yeah.
We know that like 35% screened at risk for depression. That's not, of course, a diagnosis or anything, but it does show the
Precursor,
stress
yeah.
that they're under. It's because they make range $19,000 to $29,000 a year, and if you're in a classroom with infants and toddlers, you make at the low end of that. When in fact, that's where I tell teachers all the time, the teachers in infant classes are literally molding the brains.
Yeah.
Like they literally are holding the brains and molding them
It
through
makes
their
me-
interactions and experiences with those babies.
Well, it's kind of a well-known thing that teachers don't make really as much money, but then you're talking about even below regular
Even less.
teaching.
Yes.
And that's the most important time for the brain to be developed.
Yes.
So that makes
Yeah.
it makes a lot of sense to be able to present that to legislative
Yeah.
bodies and
Yeah.
be like, hey, we need some help with this.
Yeah,
because
I mean,
it's-
50%, I think it's 50% that responded that they're food insecure. 50% don't have medical or dental insurance. I mean, the like I said, it's everything we know. They're undereducated, they're underpaid, and they're stressed.
Yeah.
I mean, they've got a lot of things going on. Yet we're asking them
to just shape the brains
to
of
shape
everyone.
the brains
Yeah.
of our future, right?
Yeah.
So
and
it's-
then wonder why there's
Yeah.
things going a little bit haywire later
Yeah.
on when we can't get these,
Yeah.
people
And
healthy.
so now what we're really trying to get people to focus on is that the early childhood workforce is the foundation for all other workforce.
Yeah.
Like if you don't have good quality care for people to be able to take their babies and their toddlers and their pre-K kiddos then it's going to be really hard to bring new business into your community because that's what families want and need. And right now in Arkansas, only 10% of infants have a high-quality childcare slot.
That is not enough.
That's not acceptable.
No.
Right? So there, and I don't mean to be so gloom and doom. There is a lot of work that's happening to try to make that better. And certainly when we presented at the caucus, and I know that there are many legislators who their ears are open, right? I mean, right here in Little Rock, the mayor has an initiative now for, I don't know if it's prenatal to 5 or birth to 5 or I can't remember exactly what he's calling it. So he sees the light, right? And people on his staff do. And so I know they're making a huge push here in Little Rock to think about all the things that affect young children and their families. So it's not just education and health, it's mental health services, it's housing, it's everything that can impact their growth. So
yeah. Well, you're doing some powerful work, and I'm super thankful to Clay for connecting us.
I am too.
Yeah.
He's a pretty good
Clay,
guy,
shout
isn't he?
out.
Right?
Yeah, he's all right.
Yeah, he's all right.
He left us, so we're not going to give him too big of a shout
That's
out.
true.
But I'm thankful that he did connect us, because now I have not only a resource, but I feel like also what we could do with our listeners is let them know that you are recruiting right now in Jefferson County and Pulaski County, looking for people who are in need of your resources and that connection. So if they're an educator, if they're a family, they need to reach out to you at Curricula Concepts, and we'll make sure that we put your contact information out there, if that's all right.
And by the end of 2020, we're going to have some online courses that'll be available, hopefully for both families and for early educators. So hopefully that'll be helpful. We just want to be a resource to folks. I mean, things are changing constantly. New science is coming out, all the time about what's happening during those earliest years. And so we want to take that and tell people what that means, right, for the kiddos that they're raising or caring for.
Don't be surprised when I'm texting and calling every 5 minutes about I know what you said about screen time, but what do I feed him? And I was telling you before the show, everything has changed from the first time. So I have no idea what to wash his clothes in or how to, it's just all so much. And I'm not asking Facebook because.
You could go off a deep cliff.
Yeah, I don't want to do
really,
that.
Really
no
quick.
Opinions, just facts.
One thing I just want to mention before we close is because I tell this to every time I do a training, I tell the teachers that I'm working with or families, whoever it is, it only takes one person. It literally takes one person who unconditionally, irrationally loves a child. Right? You can probably think in your head right now of one person, right? And you know who that, you have a lot of people that love you, right? But there is one person who is just irrational about their love for you. And that's all a child needs, is that one person. And so I tell teachers all the time, you can be that one person. Yeah. You can be it. Or family members, whoever. But a lot of times we know that children are coming to us for care, and that may be their safest spot, right? That may be where they're getting all their nurturing and their love and their attention and so
their validation.
Yes, and so they have so much power, and I want them to realize that.
Yeah, and then use it for good.
Yes.
So, I really appreciate you coming on the show, and I just can't thank you enough for your time and for your work, because you're shaping the next group of people that we're going to be taken care of by.
I tell people all the time, our work will never end, right?
No,
I should feel pretty secure. Pretty secure, because it'll take a long time.
Well, and it sounds
to spread the message.
And instead of even doom and gloom, I look at it like there's a lot of hope, because there's a big, huge future of things that are going to change, and that we can link together and link arms as a community. And build up, what's going on with our kids and our little kiddos. And I'll definitely be reaching out for sure. Yeah. And I'll definitely contact everybody I know that's in that Pulaski and Jefferson County area and see what we can do about getting more people involved with these programs.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate you being on the show. Yeah. Of course. Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks.
Little Rock, we're out.